Thank you. Thank you all for inviting me and for coming for pizza and discussion. Those two things I think always go really well together. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Bergen Volunteer Center first, and then I'll ask a few questions. I hope that you guys have questions for us as well. The Bergen Volunteer Center is a nonprofit organization. It's actually 50 years old this year in 2016. And what we do is we try to solve community problems using the power of volunteers. So we run a number of programs. We run a mentoring program for at-risk kids. We run a mentoring program for moms whose kids are at risk of neglect and abuse. And we pair up a volunteer mentor either with these kids or with these mothers to kind of help them set goals and objectives to change their lives. We run a chore service. We install grab bars for senior citizens. And that program, all of the volunteers are also senior citizens. So it's kind of a two-for. So we have these guys, it's mostly men right now, who are anywhere from 62 to 85, who come and they drive around in the van and they install grab bars and do other repairs for senior citizens. And then we run the civic leadership program, Bergen LEADS, which is how I met Maria. And my role as chief executive officer is to run things. I have a staff of 15. I have a budget of just over $1 million. And so I run my little nonprofit like a company. I go out, I speak about things, I make sure that my staff is doing their job well and that we're meeting the needs of the community. A big part of my role, too, is to try and stay current with trends and issues that are happening in this area so that I can make sure that my organization is responsive in that way. This morning I met with an immigration attorney because I wanted to understand better what are the needs of our growing immigrant population. What does it mean in Bergen County to be undocumented? And is there something that the Bergen Volunteer Center can do to help address those kinds of challenges that lots of our neighbors and friends are experiencing? So this morning, I have a teenage daughter and a tween daughter, 16 and 12, and I told them that I was coming here, and I said, you know, it's interesting to think about talking about Black History Month in the era of Black Lives Matter, right? And my 16-year-old said, yeah, maybe it should start to be Black Futures Month. And I thought, what an interesting way of thinking about it. And it is true that that I studied history, I love history. I'm always poring over dusty old tomes of things. But I think that, for me at least, the lessons of history are in order for us to figure out what should be the lessons of today and what should be the lessons of the future. So I'm seeing a lot of the issues in Black Lives Matter, right? Hashtag Black Lives Matter, and how Twitter is becoming the new march, right? And making sure that issues stay at the forefront and keeping all of us aware of what's going on and really thinking powerfully about what role we have in making change. I work in the nonprofit community because I want to make a difference. I started out in education, and I like helping people. I like solving problems. I like the feeling that I get being a part of a community that's willing to pull for each other and not just for ourselves. And so it gives me a great deal of satisfaction, the kind of work that my organization does. But my role in the organization is to make sure that my organization is the most effective it can be. And that gives me a great deal of pride and excitement around that. And it allows me to be in touch with the challenges and the opportunities in Bergen County to make sure that as a community, we serve each other. Because I think that that's how we advance. I have tons of other things to say, but why don't you go and then we can maybe ping pong back and forth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's perfect. Good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Marcel Rogers. I got to start off by saying, considering this is going on YouTube, yes, I do work for DCPMP. However, I have to state that I'm not here in a consulting capacity or representative of DCPMP, Division of Child Protection and Permanency, but I will be speaking on some of my experiences with my job and how it's influenced some of my successes, some of my perspectives, and my approach to the casework. So, let's start off with a little background with me. Like it was said before, I'm working towards my master's in child advocacy. I received my bachelor's in history from Kean University in 2001. I became a member of my organization, my fraternity, Lambda, Upsilon, in 1997. Why that's so significant is because my fraternity, my organization gave me an opportunity to provide me with a voice, provide me with a platform, to provide me with opportunity to gain perspective and to identify with like-minded people. And why is it so important to identify with like-minded people? There is a theory that drives a lot of sociological theories and casework. Pardon me, I didn't really prepare too much, so I'm kind of speaking from the top. But the implementation of our practices and policies really derived from acknowledging and accepting the family systems theory. Family systems theory speaks to the fact that each individual cannot be looked upon as an isolated entity and is a function of a broader system. And that person contributing to that system, their contributions are important to the functioning of the broader system. So for example, the immediate family system, you have a mother, you have a father, and you have the children. Each individual in that system plays a role, whatever that role may be, whether that person is the provider, the disciplinary, the athletic outlet, the person who helps you develop cognitively, the person who helps you create emotional attachments. This, at its core, gives you the opportunity to then gain confidence to go out and make other connections within your community. So then you start to contribute to the broader system, your immediate neighborhood community, your neighborhood system. You have law enforcement, you have different officials in the community, you have your clergy, you have your teachers. Those individuals then contribute to the state system, the country system, the cultural system, and the mental system. Any disruption to that person's individual role disrupts the entire system. And one of the things that we focus on with child protection is trying to identify those disruptions to the family system. And predominantly, the disruptions to the systems are usually traumas. Traumas stem from any particular areas of, whether it be a breakup of a boyfriend or girlfriend, the loss of a family member, the change in your environment, the change in your school, the change in your family dynamic. And with that being said, it also speaks to a cycle. I don't like it's a sociological term, I don't like using the term cycle of oppression because it speaks too much negativity into that experience. It's a cycle that contributes to your education. I'm a firm believer that your environment plus your experience is always going to dictate what your education is going to be. Your education is going to dictate what your perspective is going to be on yourself, what your outlook and your esteem is going to be of yourself, and what your outlook is going to be regarding your community at large. So with your environment plus your experience equating to your education, keep in mind that we deal with families that have generational identities within a given community. You're born into a particular community. Within that community, you have access to particular resources. And before I go on, these things that I'm going to talk about may seem like there are limitations and detriments to either your social identity or your mobility within a social context. I'm just asking for us to be aware and conscious of these influences that affect how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive the community around us, so that we can try and break this cycle. So moving on, within that cycle, you're born into that environment, you have access to certain resources. Those resources are going to dictate what your education is going to be, what type of access you're going to have to certain education. The level of education you receive is going to dictate what type of money you're going to make, what type of environment you're going to move into, what type of family you're going to bring up. You decide to bring a family into this world, and then you start the next generation of that cycle. And the cycle seldom ever breaks itself. It only breaks itself when we are conscious of the cycle. We make a diligent effort to try and break out of that system, to seek greater resources within our community, to seek gaining a greater education, to seek gaining a greater perspective on who we are and what our esteem is regarding ourselves, and it contributes to positive influences in the world around us. Now, this may sound like some utopian ideology as far as how we're going to fix the system, how we're going to help families, how we're going to work against trauma. But it's something that has been present and dominant in influencing how we do our work for the betterment of our families. Child services has been looked upon in the state of New Jersey, probably across the country, as a policing agency for quite some time. There were a couple of lawsuits and some unfortunate deaths that occurred due to certain things that prevented individuals from ensuring the stability of certain families. Child services across the country is now began to look at identifying what is under that, what is the underlying need that is influencing why certain individuals are making certain decisions. Child services, child protective services, mental health services, drug addiction services are now moving away from just saying, you know what, doing drugs is a problem. You know, you're a heroin addict, that's the problem. You're a cocaine addict, that's the problem. No, what's the driving force behind what led you to want to do drugs? What is the driving force behind what led you to want to abuse your child? What is the driving force behind what led you to neglect your child? Now we're starting to look at more economic influences, socio-political influences. We're starting to look at that cycle of oppression and seeing, okay, but what resources are lacking? What resources can we provide to our communities in order to strengthen them? What can we do to provide stability? What can we do to try and compensate some of the traumas that are preventing us from achieving our goals? And one of the biggest things that I think is an asset to the entire child protective system is that we are now incorporating multidisciplinary approaches into addressing social discord. We're not saying one child protective service is going to be the end all be all, will fix everything. No, we're looking at local law enforcement, we're looking at clergy, we're looking at other child protective services, we're looking at mental health agencies, we're looking at the families, we're looking at the children. We're looking at the families and the children as the biggest asset and the biggest resource for change that we have. Because the change has to start with them. It's not gonna, anyone in here that says that they have changed immediately because someone said, hey, you know what you're doing wrong, you gotta do something else. You wouldn't be telling the truth. Because I'm almost 40 years old and I still have a hard time listening to my mother. But you know what, over time you sit there, you ponder, you contemplate, and when you feel that you're being brought into the fold, when you feel like you're being brought into the conversation, that you're not being spoken to, you're not being told what to do, but you're actually a part of the solution rather than being pointed to as a part of the problem. You feel empowered, you feel part of a solution, you start to begin to see that, okay, there's an outlet. My words, my experience has value and has importance to how I'm going to change the world around me, as well as create a better environment for the family I intend to have at some point. So, like my esteemed colleague said, I can go on and on. I'm sure there are other things that I can talk about. But I think it would be helpful to bounce ideas off of one another. You guys can ask questions, and I think it's important that we don't remain too historically fact heavy. In that, I think that having a conversation, having a back and forth, is much more productive than saying, well, Dr. Murray Bowen came up with the family systems theory in the early 19 and it created, you guys can feel like you're in class. This is the preview day for you guys. You guys are in class, you're going to study. So let's have a conversation, and hopefully something in this conversation gets brought outside of the room, and we can, bring it into the world.
So I'm going to piggyback on something that Marcel said. So we talked about the family system becomes the neighborhood system, right, becomes the community system. So I like to focus more on community systems, right, and community change. So I brought props. So, and I'll explain in a second. I've been spending a lot of time lately thinking a lot about Flint, Michigan. Does anybody know what's going on in Flint, Michigan right now? What? Okay, the water system got poisoned. I mean, they poisoned it. And I know people in Flint. I have taken groups of people to Flint 2 years in a row and got to kind of see this community. And so I'm a nerd, so I've been pouring through this stuff. And does anybody know what was happening in Detroit a couple of years ago? All right, Detroit, the city of Detroit, not far from Flint, is the largest city in America that had to declare bankruptcy. Okay, car industry, all sorts of stuff happening, and the system got disrupted and broken. Right, jobs leave, people who could leave left, tax values, property values go down, tax rolls go down, and all of a sudden the city is bankrupt. So I have my sister-in-law lives in Brooklyn. She's a total hipster, and she always knows all the cool things, right? So my Christmas present this year is this awesome wallet. It came in a beautiful box, and it's from the Shinola, it's called the Shinola Company in Detroit. So this morning, wrapped around my New York Times was this giant advertising thing from Shinola, Detroit. And it says, there's a funny thing that happens when you build factories in this country. It's called jobs. All right, so here's Shinola. They make beautiful products in Detroit where there haven't been a lot of new jobs in a long time. And they have decided that not only is their stuff beautiful, and I'm sure it's very expensive because that's kind of how my sister-in-law rolls, but that's okay. But they have decided, right, that the way that they're going to get people to buy their stuff is to talk about the difference that they're making in a city that maybe you care about, maybe you don't, but you totally care about these people, right, and the dignity that they have by having a totally awesome job, right? So here is a company that has decided, right, that they want to be part of the solution in a community trying to heal itself, right? And I thought this was, again, you know, like, okay, whatever, like Black History Month or Black Futures Month, right? And so what is going to happen to communities? Detroit and Flint both happen to be majority Black cities. But how do we begin to disrupt the cycle of failure and bankruptcy and things falling apart and start to rebuild a cycle of promise and hope and a future? And some of it may start from people having a cool idea, right, and deciding that they want to locate themselves in a place that needs opportunity and hope and a cool idea. And so I was really proud to have this wallet anyway, but it represents so much more than just what it is, and that's very powerful to me. So that's my prop.
So you know, and I wanted to talk about some. I don't have any exact numbers. I'm gonna throw out some topics out there that are kind of on the same track of poverty in the States. What I think we also need to realize too is that there is an over-representation and a disproportionate amount of minorities represented within the juvenile justice system, the penal system, as well as the child protection system. And I really wish I had brought the numbers with me because the numbers are staggering. I mean, and I'm going to try and keep as much political commentary out of this conversation as I can because I hate the polarizing implementation of that conversation. But the United States by far outweighs any other country in its incarceration rate. Its incarceration rate of juveniles, its incarceration rate of juveniles as adults, incarceration rates of minorities, and like I said, the representation of children within the child protective environment. And in analyzing some of this data and analyzing some of these trends, we're now starting to, our child protective services in the country is now starting to look back, and like I said, starting to look at some of these underlying needs, some of what's going on, what experiences and what implementations are unique to particular communities in particular areas of the country. Not to stigmatize any particular community, even though the disproportionate representation does kind of stigmatize, well, doesn't kind of, it does stigmatize certain populations in the country, but we're starting to look and say, okay, well, what resources or what lack thereof is influencing this individual's inability to gain employment, to have stable housing, to have regular income, to have strong supports in their household? What can we now start doing to kind of piece these things together? So while I'm not a numbers person, it's still important to look at the numbers. It's still important to kind of say, okay, well, if there's a overrepresentation in this particular community, in the state, okay, what's going on over there? What's unique to New Jersey that isn't necessarily present in places like Montana, Nevada, Arizona? Lost my train of thought. Okay, so going back, one of the things that I've been most proud of with regards to my experience with my current job is being involved with adolescent advocacy. New Jersey was one of the first states to start a pilot program that was actually presented to Congress in developing an independent living program and independent living assessment and independent living skills, along with the Ansel Casey Foundation out of Washington, and presented these ideas to Congress, and the rest of the country is now starting to model their independent living skills and their aging out services for youth across the country. It's now starting to model it according to what New Jersey is doing. So as much as child services in New Jersey has gotten a lot of bad publicity, there must be certain things going on right here if the country's now looking and saying, okay, well, what's going on over here? What's going on over here that we can now incorporate to what we're doing? Now, why adolescents? Why am I so proud and so happy to work with adolescents? Because, adolescents are the most at-risk population, especially when it comes to child services, especially when it comes to some of the communities that we come from and some of the resources that are available. All of you in this room do represent that segment of our population that is now helping to break these cycles. And I'll say that because I got to go back again and say, I come from a Jamaican background. My mother was born in Jamaica. She came up here at the age of was left in Jamaica at the age of 16 while my grandmother came up here, was working, sending money back. My mom came up to the United States in '72, and she had me and my brother, and me and my brother represent the first generation in our family to go to college. So that again speaks to the cycle I was talking about before. Had my mother not broken the cycle of remaining in Jamaica and going through the throes of trying to survive down there, Jamaica can be borderline third world at times, but for her to still overcome that and to come up and constantly inundate me with the fact that I want you to have better, I want you to have better, I want you to have better. How many of us in this room have probably heard that as a kid? We're like, oh God, come on, it's wonderful. I gotta go beat up my friends. I don't have time to hear this. But looking back now, having two children of my own and knowing and catching myself sounding like my dad, catching myself sounding like my mom. But I have these conversations with my 4-year-old and my 2-year-old now. I look at my 2-year-old daughter and I wish the world for her. I wish for her to be raised as a queen. I wish for her to be treated as a queen. I want my son to grow up and be successful. But I also make these statements knowing that there are certain systemic things and certain sociological things and certain economic things that are going to work against them. May not be deliberately, may just be something that's just inherent based on what's available to my family now, but I want more for them. So coming and breaking the cycle of what my mother's gone through and working to go to college, and after I graduated college, I'm like, yes, done, free, and then a couple years later, I'm like, oh, let's go back to grad school, sure. And now I'm thinking about going back and getting my PhD. So all of you that are sitting here thinking you're tired of school, probably going to go back, and probably going to be kicking yourself, but it's going to be something that you're going to cover it as an achievement that a large majority of the population does not have. And it's something that puts you one step ahead towards success. It's one thing that gives you that ideal of perspective. And not so much perspective for yourselves, but being able to go out there and influence the world around you. And there are going to be reoccurring themes in this conversation that I'm having. It's going to sound like I keep repeating the same things, but I want it to sink in. I want for you to be able to walk out here and say, you know what, I can make a difference, whether it be with one person, whether it be with an entire community. Whatever career path you choose in life, you have the opportunity to influence to an extreme degree. And it's just a matter of you realizing, okay, well, I was given the opportunity, I pushed myself forward, and now I don't have to be ashamed for what I've been able to achieve.
I have a question.
Sure.
You both worked for the greater good. Okay? You're not in Wall Street. So tell us what prompted you to select this area. Why did you decide to work for child service? Why, Lynne, with all your leadership skills, you could go into the business world and do, your best, you decided to go for nonprofit?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it was opportunity. All right, so here's my crazy path. When I applied to college, I thought I wanted to be a doctor. I knew that I wanted to study history because I loved it, but I was definitely going to be pre-med. And I went to college in Atlanta. And in February, there was this beautiful, wonderful sunny day. Those like kind of magical days that let you know that spring is coming. And the freshman chemistry class at the school where I went, the third term was something called quantitative analysis. They handed you a test tube with some stuff in it at the beginning of the term, and you spent as many hours in the lab as it took you until you could say all the things that were in that test tube. It was a horrible class. Everybody moaned and groaned about it. And I sat there on that beautiful sunny day in February, and I thought, I could spend all of spring semester in a laboratory trying to figure out what they put in my test tube, or I could be sitting under trees reading books. And so that was the end of my medical career, just like that, on a whim. I was like, I'm dropping chemistry, and I'm taking only history and English classes. So then I was going to be a journalist, then I was going to be a filmmaker, who knows? I don't know what I wanted to do. So a lot of it was opportunities that emerged. My dad worked in college admissions, so I knew something about that. My mother is actually trained as a social worker. And I had worked at a summer school program for a couple of summers when I was in college. And that school called me up one day and offered me a job in admissions. And I thought, sure, I don't really have a better plan right now. But what I found was what kept me in the helping people business is the satisfaction that I got out of the work. And so once I got into it, I didn't think that I was there permanently, right? I thought, oh, I'm doing this till figure out what I want to do. But instead, what I discovered is that I loved what I was doing, and it brought great satisfaction. And I was lucky enough that I was successful enough that other opportunities began to happen, and that I could continue to exercise my curiosity and feel like I was continuing to grow in my work. But I also recognized that I wanted my work to have a bigger purpose on the world than just in my pocketbook. And so sometimes I didn't get paid very well, but I had great meaning to my work. And you stick at it long enough, and you discover that you can get paid well enough to have the life you live, that you want to live, in a way that also brings you great satisfaction in the work that you do. So a little bit accidental and then a little bit purposeful, I would say.
My reasoning for going to my field is somewhat similar, but a little different. And to be completely honest, my career kind of imposed itself on me because I had bills to pay. Full disclosure, I graduated from Kean University in 2001 with a degree in history. My complete intent was to teach. I wanted to be a teacher. And the reason, and this is a story that kind of always stuck with me, but the reason why I initially wanted to go into teaching was because of a teacher. Now, reason being is I grew up in Brooklyn, New Jersey, predominantly Caucasian suburban environment.
We have a campus there.
Pardon? Oh,
We have a campus there.
Okay. Oh, yes, you do, and right by the police station. And so predominantly Caucasian environment, very small African American community. Went through the throes of trying to fit in, trying to walk through different social circles, trying to identify with, my African American side, while still staying true to my Jamaican side. Yes, there's a difference. You talk to Jamaican, talk to someone from up here, they will explain to you. While still trying to fit into the social mainstream of my school, and kind of, I want to say ignorantly trying to put my colors decide. Like when it came to the color of my skin, I didn't see that when I was hanging out with my friends, but unfortunately, the population around me saw it. So my junior year in high school, history, loved history to death. I had a teacher, his name was Mr. Bodie, and I'm trying to make the story really quick. Long story short, he came from money. His grandfather had something to do with the gold rush in Alaska in 1849. His wife won the lottery, so I went to him one day. I'm like, why are you teaching? You're like a millionaire in the suburbs. You're not teaching in Marlboro. You're not teaching up in Somerset. You're not teaching in a more affluent area. And he's like, well, what am I gonna do with myself if I'm not teaching? He's like, I feel like this is what my calling is. This is where I need to be. And so it kind of piqued my interest. It's like, all right, well, here it is where he has the opportunity to do something else, but something is calling him to want to teach. And I was in the mall one day, my junior year in high school, and I ran into Mr. Bodie, and I ran into his wife. And mind you, Mr. Bodie is a Caucasian individual. And he stops me and says, oh, honey, this is the young man I was telling you about in school. I'm like, why is this guy talking about me? It's kind of weird. Do I need to tell him? And he was like, no, this is the kid I told you about. I feel he has a lot of potential. And he took me to the side the following, following week. He's like, look, you fall asleep in class, you don't study, and you get B's on your test. Like, what are you doing? And, I was like, okay, whatever. So anyway, it kind of drew me like, someone is now going out of their way to have a conversation about me outside of the classroom to talk about the potential that I have. And I started to think, now I have a strong, household at home. What benefit, or what a great benefit that could be to somebody else who doesn't have the support at home. To have someone that doesn't have a regular day-to-day, 24-hour influence or interaction with them, to now go out of their way and say, look, I see, and without it sounding like a cliche, with it sounding genuine from this individual's voice that doesn't have anything to do with me after 3:30 p.m. when I go to school that hour. So he helped me do my entrance exam, my entrance essay to Kean University. I ended up majoring in education and history. Unfortunately, again, college social life got to me, and my grades suffered. I got kicked out of the School of Education. Graduated, didn't know what the hell I was going to do. Like, student loans were coming in soon. I got to help my mom pay bills. I got to help take care of my grandmother. And I selling luggage for a little bit. Felt my self-esteem was way low. I said, look, I have a college degree, what am I doing selling luggage? I got all of a sudden I have a fraternity brother from Bloomfield who reached out to me, and he helped me get a job at Tri-City Corporation. And then I was working there for a little bit as a case manager, got laid off of there, then I started teaching in Plainfield, New Jersey. And then this now was a stark contrast in what I had experienced in Woodbridge. Now, Plainfield has gone through a lot of transition. It's now become an extremely urban environment, a lot of gang influences, a lot of broken families, a lot of single parents. And I ended up getting laid off of that job. And then I got a call to come to an open house for my current job. Went to the open house, did my interview. I guess the interview went well because I'm here today. But since then, it's been a constant drive to try and do better and try and give back to the community, because I feel as though just having a positive influence, and again, I don't want to sound like a cliche, but really, if you really believe in the fact that you can be a positive influence on somebody, it will have an effect on somebody. I just want to share one really quick story. I had an adolescent, and was involved with gangs. He was a percent of the blood, unfortunately. And I kept on telling him this kid was a straight A student, honor roll, had seen a lot of unfortunate things in his life. And I kept on telling him, look, keep going down this path, man, end up in jail. You keep going down this path, man, end up in jail. It sounded like a parent, but I really cared what happened to him. Unfortunately, he got caught in a situation. Now he's doing 7 years. I haven't seen him in about 4 or 5 years, and I wrote to him. I found him, I wrote to him, and I got a letter back from him yesterday. I was like a kid on Christmas. Wow, I wrote back. Long story short, to spare the emotional aspects of things, he said, you know what, I was just such an angry person, and I'm proud of who I am because I'm going to make myself a better person, and I'm sad that on my 21st birthday, he had to view his son through the glass window, his infant child. He hadn't been there for birth, he was in jail, and he has all these high aspirations. I hope when I get out, I can go to college, if there's anything you can help me. He's not locked up in juvie, he's in prison. So it kind of let me know that for every setback there's still some triumph you can find in that. There's still that degree of hope that you can try and instill in some of these families that are suffering. So yeah, that's why I became social worker that long, showing that story. So anyone else any questions?
I have a question for you again. So I'm sorry, I'm very curious. So Lynne, you work in Bergen County.
Yep.
And it's we're in Paramus, kind of 80% white. But Bergen County is not 80% white. We have South Bergen, and the same refers to New Jersey. There are areas where are. But can you tell me how you see the difference? How you can work in those groups? You work for the entire country. You work for the entire state. Would you like to elaborate? Did you see some heart beating in one direction and another direction? How do you make your judgments?
Yeah, it's interesting. My background is a little bit similar to Marcel's. I grew up in a overwhelmingly white town, the way I tend to describe it in Massachusetts, and so being sort of hyper aware of race was like the air I breathed and the water I drank, right? And yet, all of my closest friends until I was 14 and moved away from that town were white. That was all that was there, So, so I feel like I maybe in some respects became the kind of person that can move between worlds, right? And talk to people from a lot of different groups and a lot of different aspects. So a lot of the work that I did early in my career was actually diversity work, diversity training, working with teachers and faculties to make sure that that they really understood everybody who was in their classroom and what the differences and challenges might be for different people in the classroom just to be present to learn. And so for me, really understanding that intersection between what it means to be African American and what that perspective is. I have worked really hard to try to make sure that I had a cultural sensitivity to what does it mean to be Latino and speak a different language at home, right? Being a woman, being gay, all these kinds of things, because sometimes they end up being barriers to opportunity when they shouldn't be, right? And I think it's incumbent on systems, right? Schools, classrooms, city council, whatever it is, to actually make those barriers go away, right? Everybody should have opportunity, and if they're approaching a system from a way that feels like it's locking them out, I actually think it's the system that needs to change. I don't think I'm unique in that perspective, but I do think that it's really important to try and challenge those kinds of things. So one of my goals at the Bergen Volunteer Center, I'll be perfectly honest with you, our demographic statistics are, quite honestly, pretty embarrassing, right? So in our chore program, Helping Senior Citizens, in 2015, we installed over 1,500 grab bars in all 70 municipalities all over Bergen County. The demographics of the people we helped were about 3% Asian and Asian American. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I walk around Bergen County, I see a lot more Asian and Asian American people than that. It was about 4% Latino and about 5% African American. So we served, I don't know what it was. It's like 80% of the people we served were white. And that's terrific. We're doing really good work. But I'm sitting there thinking, like, somebody's grandma, right, or abuela is also in her home and needs a grab bar. And we're a free service, right? And I'm like, wait a minute. If we serve the whole county, we have to serve the whole county. So why aren't they calling us? Right? Why aren't they calling us? Why aren't they, how is it that we can't seem to help them? And I think that that's the problem, that's the volunteer center's problem, right? If they're not reaching out to us, we have to figure out a way to reach out to them. And so that's what we're doing. We've translated our materials into Korean. Right? I have, we have a phone number where you can leave a message in Korean and somebody can answer it and call you back. And because we want to say to all the different communities in Bergen County that we are here for you too, right? And so that's a big push. It is deeply personal to me that we serve the whole county and that we serve everybody in the county to the best of our ability, because that's an issue that I care about. And now I'm in a position to make my organization care about it too, right? And so I'm pushing my staff because what we've been doing isn't good enough for what I care about and what I believe we say we stand for. So that's how I am using that perspective and that passion that I have, and now I'm in a position where I have the power, right, to make this organization more reflective. And part of my job is to try and figure out, what do I need to do, right, to convince Abuela that we're an okay place to call if you need a grandpa? What do I have to do, right? And so I'm reaching out to people to help me understand better why that hasn't been happening already, and making sure that as an organization we are, in fact, reaching out that way.
And to answer your question, piggyback on what you're saying, one of the largest driving forces in helping me make a decision with regards to how I approach my casework, as well as the implementation of policy with child service agencies, mental health agencies, social work agencies, is implementing the ideal of being culturally competent and having a culturally relative perspective. Loaded statement, very simply stated though, it means trying to gain an understanding of being culturally relative means placing yourself in relation to the culture that you're trying to work with. Whether you're working with the Asian American community, you're working with the East Indian American community, you're working with the Italian American community, the Irish American community, African American community. Placing yourself in the shoes of that individual for a moment. It's inundated to us not to pass judgment based on our own personal perspectives, our own personal set of ideals, our own personal mores, social norms. If you really want to help someone, you have to put yourself in their shoes for one moment. And going back to what I said before, looking at the underlying need, it's not about drug use, it's about what's causing you to use drugs. Also speaking to being culturally competent, we also have to look at the communities we serve, the populations there. We mentioned Bergen County, we can mention Warren County, and in correlation or contrast to, like, say, a Union County or Essex County. Essex County, you may find a larger uptake in substance abuse cases. You may find a larger uptake in physical abuse cases and neglect cases. There are services that are implemented for these families that we work with. Services that are readily available in those communities based on the availability of transportation, the availability of agencies, the availability of slots and openings for these services, and whether or not the family's going to be willing to get there. Now, if you look at New Jersey, they call New Jersey the Garden State for a very valid reason, but there is a stark contrast between the populations in New Jersey as well as the environment. If you go from North Jersey, Central Jersey, South Jersey. You have to start looking at the availability of resources in North Jersey. You have to look at the fact that if there is an issue that is present with a family and we're trying to help address that issue, and we're identifying, okay, well, you need parenting skills, you need individual therapy, you need group therapy. Okay, what services in the area offer those services? And if they do, does the family have the means to get there? Can they get there through public transportation? Do they have their own vehicle? These are all key components that contribute to how the decision-making process is implemented on how we are going to try and help our communities and help our families. And you think about it, I'm talking about substance abuse, physical abuse, neglect, lack of employment, housing, but how much do we take for granted mobility? How much do we take for granted being able to get somewhere? How much do we all take for granted in this room being able to get to school today? Some of us probably have to take a bus, some of us took a cab, some of us use Uber, some of us had our own cars. Those are little things we take for granted. If some of us didn't have the resources to get to school, how did we get that education? We have the advent of an online education out, but then ask yourself the question, how many of the families that we serve, or how many families that we interact with, how many of them are going to have access to the internet? How many of them are going to have access to a computer? How many of them are going to have access to a library? You know, that old ancient thing of books and you know, and with that being said, because I wanted to say this earlier, I think we also have to keep in mind the fact that while, you know, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all these social media outlets are great in bringing the global community together, we also have to keep in mind, at least this is my opinion, it's an apparatus of sensory overload and no filters. You know, too much information, too quick, and a lot of people don't fact check. Like, I'm sure all of us read some of the stuff we see on Facebook and Instagram, and we're like, really? Oh, there's an asteroid floating around the planet that's going to kill us tomorrow. Like, come on, like, we got to fact. Like, but anyone will put anything out there, and anybody will believe it. And we're so easily influenced, and we're so ready. And I think part of the reason why we're so easily influenced is because we're so receptive to be directed. We're so receptive to want to belong and be part of a group. That, I mean, talk about Maslow's hierarchy of need. Part of the hierarchy of need is being part of a group. That's how you build esteem. That's how you build acceptance. That's how you build your community. You know, you have your safety, you have your basic needs being met, and then you look to become part of the group. Once you're part of that group, that's where you start experimenting in creating your own identity, being an autonomous identity, you know, and having the fortitude, having the esteem, having the prestige to say, okay, I can achieve. So with that being said, you know, I drive myself by not judging people based on who I am. I have to put myself in their shoes. I have to sympathize with, you know, I can't even imagine what it's like to have 5 or 6 kids and the dad's not around, or he's in jail, or for the dad to have custody of the kids because mom's out there drugging up, or for losing a family member, or sitting there and looking at, you know, 5, 6-year-old child who has very limited perspective on the immediate environment around them, and someone has to explain to them, well, I have to take you away from mommy and daddy because they did X, Y, and Z. Too heavy for a kid to handle, but yet it's something that has to be done, and it, you know, maybe it'll come later, but then we have to talk about how we deal with trauma, how we normalize trauma, how we're going to normalize our emotions regarding trauma, and how we're going to impose that upon children.
That's my question.
Yes.
I'll be drilling more. We established that you both work in the business of helping people. Give us an example, a situation, case. You as in Bergen, or maybe as the councilwoman, that really made you feel hopeless, helpless, and then empowered, that really changed your mind in helping people.
All right. Let's see. Well, so there are a couple things, I guess. I mean, in the work that we do now, I'll tell you a good story, and then I'll tell you a city council story. It's not as sexy, but whatever. So, in our program, in our mentoring program, we have a mom with several kids. Her marriage broke up. Just a lot going on, and for a whole variety of reasons. I think because her life was kind of spiraling a little bit out of control. She was referred to our program to have a mentor, kind of help her with her parenting skills, to kind of stay focused on her goals of creating a safe and stable environment for her kids, right? And the idea of our mentoring program with moms is to try and help moms, in this case, not end up in his office where he has to take their kids away. Okay, so we're the volunteer effort trying also to help. So this mom was awesome. You know, she developed a great relationship with her mentor. She set goals for herself, and she began achieving her goals, one of which was to go back to school and get her degree. And she did. She graduated college. But she was still having a really hard time finding a job commensurate with her new college degree. And she had kids to feed. And, you know, a lot of times what happens for folks is they revert back to what they knew. She'd worked in fast food restaurants. She got a certificate as a home healthcare aide. So she was working all the time, but not making enough money to kind of really pull herself ahead. So we encouraged her to come in actually and do some volunteer work in our office. We're the volunteer center, right? So she needed to hone her office skills so that she could present herself with her college degree for the kinds of jobs that she wanted. So she came in, worked on her computer skills, helped us out, answered phones, did a lot of those kinds of things, and gained her confidence, right, and her self-esteem. To make a long story short, a company here in the area called up. They want to do more, right? They have their job, but they want to be a socially responsible company. I think it's an all-women company. So was there something they could do? So we said, would you be willing to give her like a practice interview so she can kind of, again, continue to hone her skills. So they interviewed her over the phone first, and they liked her so much, they said, you know what, come in, let's interview you for real. And she got a job, right? So now she's working in an office, in the HR department of an office. She has regular work hours. She's making twice as much money as she was making before. And so that was one that it seemed really complicated. How do you, it's hard to look for a job while you're working, right? And you have 3 kids at home. And it's hard to get the skills you need in order to try and boost yourself that way. So it looked like an intractable problem, but through some relationships and networking and being willing to try some things a little bit differently, it worked out for this family. And so now we're thinking, wait a minute, we need to be doing this, we need to be doing more of this, and really thinking more intentionally about that rather than accidental, for lack of a better term. You got one?
Yeah, it's funny that I was sitting here, because I know the stories are out there, I just had to try and think of one. But it puts into perspective how much we see, and if I had the time and the authorization to talk about it, I could continue to talk about for hours about things I've seen in 3/4 of you wouldn't believe. But before I share the story, just want to throw a stat out there. An adolescent incarcerated as an adult, or an adolescent incarcerated period, an adolescent incarcerated as an adult is 3 times more likely to commit suicide, 3 times more likely to be sexually assaulted while in jail, and I forget the actual stat, but it's more likely to be homeless once they transition out of incarceration. Those statistics are the same for a youth aging out of the child welfare system, as well as an individual in the LGBTQ community looking to come out to their family. This is a point to the fact that without a strong support system at home, it's not impossible, but it's a lot harder to succeed. I don't want to use the word survive, it's a lot harder to succeed. And with those stats being out there, I'm at the point with the story that I heard, like talk about specific cases, I heard a story of 2 youth that were incarcerated, and they're still around, they're not homeless, they haven't been sexually assaulted, they haven't revisited the juvenile justice or the adult justice system. So I feel good I'm happy to the fact that I don't have to open the paper and see that one of these youth lost their lives or ended up homeless or is back in jail. But the one story I really, really want to share is there was a 17-year-old female, and this one really stuck out. There was a 17-year-old female, and read in the paper that she was prostituting herself, and the person that was trafficking her happened to be a brother of a close friend of hers. And law enforcement caught up with her. Luckily enough, she was able to be saved in that situation. That's not the success part of the story. The youth had come back. Come to find out, she had gone through an unbelievable amount of trauma. She had been sexually assaulted at the age of 13 by 3 classmates. It was brought to the attention of a certain individual, and nothing was done about it. And so you have a 13-year-old, where we all were at the age of 13, trying to figure out who we are, what we're doing, where we're going, what groups we're going to belong to. Now this 13-year-old has to not only deal with that, but deal with the added trauma of this situation not being addressed and not feeling supported, because when brought to the attention of individuals that were supposed to be there to help her, she didn't get any help. So now she internalizes all this, she has to deal with all this. And again, what I said before about the underlying need, what drives you to do drugs, not the drug itself. And this youth was self-medicating. She was doing everything under the sun in particular, everything. So came to the attention of a colleague that when she was 17, met with her, and first time they met with her, she was under the influence. She was in treatment, she was under the influence. She got kicked out of treatment because she was showing up there high. And it kept on being stressed upon her. Look, there is only two ways out of the situation. Two ways out of the situation. You're going to OD and die, or you're going to have to recover. And with substance abuse recovery, you also have to keep in mind relapse is a part of recovery. It's going to happen. You have to anticipate that. But in any event, diligent efforts went into place to get this individual the help that she needed. Her mother went the religious route. We went or my colleague went the supportive resource route. And it wasn't so much the treatment that helped her, it was the constant influence of people engaging her, calling her, is everything all right? Or, what's going on? Do you want to talk? Let's go out and have something to eat. Let's go for a walk. Let's have a talk. And after a short period of, after she had completed the retreat program, decided to relocate, said, you know what, people, you're going to hear this with recovery, people, places, and things. You have to get away from certain people, certain places, and certain things that are going to influence you into negative things. She said, you know what, I'm getting the hell out of here, move to another state. And my colleague actually got a call from this individual, and she said, you know what, if it wasn't for you, I would be dead. And just think, like, when you really internalize mortality, really internalize the finality of certain things, someone to come to you, and for you, and hopefully none of us in this room have experienced an overwhelming amount of death in our lives, but I'm sure we've all come across it at some point in time when we've lost a loved one that we wish was here. But for someone to come to you and say, if it wasn't for you, I would be dead, I can't do anything but thank you. That for a 17-year-old who is caught up in, most 17-year-olds are caught up in their individuality, going against the grain, doing what I want to do, I don't want to listen to anybody, it's cool, I got this thing. It's incorporated into our practice to expect that adolescents feel as though they're immortal. There was, and I'll admit that because there was a point in time where I was like, oh, I could do no wrong. I smoked cigarettes for, umpteenth amount of years. I was doing unsafe things out there in the community when I was younger. I look back on it now, I'm like, I can't say because of where I work, but there's certain things I would do to my son and my daughter, state the things that I did, and I would probably get in trouble for it. But I look back on it and I'm like, wow. And I look back on my dad speaking to me, my mom, my friends, and it really, really sticks with you because there could have been that possibility because this person wanted to die. This person, it was asked for, well, what are you trying to do? I don't want to be here. And because of these strong supports, this is where the success comes because this person was able to break that cycle that I was talking about before. Again, this is not to say that the rest of life is going to go hunky-dory. There are going to be trials, tribulations, and obstacles we have to overcome. And it's going to be up to us and people around us to support one another and make sure we try and overcome those obstacles. That's my answer. Sure.
Stop me if I say something incorrect here, but your organization helps these individuals who are in bad situations and, if necessary, takes them out of bad environments they're in to help their lives and guide them towards success. But there are likely more individuals with troublesome lives that you just don't have the manpower or resources to help, correct? So my question is, what is the larger solution we're working towards to fix these bad environments so that all of these individuals can all have equal chances of success?
So to answer that, and I gotta state again, because I can't represent my agency in this conversation, what I can say is that Child Protective Services overall, the social work environment overall in the state of New Jersey, it has gone through a transition of moving from dealing with the individual to dealing with the entire system. So the hope is, and if it was poorly explained, it's Child Protective Services doesn't go in and take a child forever and say, okay, you're going to be over here forever. We don't care about what happens to your family. We don't care about what happens to your community. We're just here to make sure you're out of that traumatic environment. However, removing you from that traumatic environment is just as traumatic as the environment itself. It's been said that being taken out of your immediate environment can be most greatly correlated to experiencing a death, experiencing a loss, or being in a war-torn country. Because that's how tumultuous that internalization of that experience can be for the individual. So to give you a short answer to your question is that the multidisciplinary approach is key in identifying different resources and pulling together ideas. The focus of social work and child services is to empower everyone, not just the afflicted. The entire system is being afflicted by the disruption of whatever role one particular individual has manipulated in that system. So the child service removal is temporary. It's not meant to last forever. There are those extreme situations where unfortunately children are adopted into the system. They either go with family members or foster parents. But the ultimate goal is to bring everyone together. The ultimate goal is to hope that conversations like this, people who aren't in the field of social work, people who are in the field of finances, and say, hey, you know what? This person, I heard this person is abusing their child. The reason why they're abusing their child is because they're probably stressed out because they're paying bills and Johnny's asking for a new pair of shoes. Mommy and daddy can't afford the shoes, so they feel bad about themselves. And Johnny keeps asking. They finally get to a breaking point where they lash out and they smack the kid, or they do something extreme. So if we have people in the financial field, if we have people in the agricultural field, whatever, we're pulling all these ideas together. We're starting, our child services is influencing individuals to nurture their aptitudes, to nurture their wants, nurture their needs, and do what we can with the available resources that we do have to obtain that goal. Now, I would be lying to you if I sat here and said we didn't have a long way to go. There is a lot to do. And look, they always talk about the pendulum swing. The pendulum always swings in the other direction at some point. You know, something happens, it goes up here, we gotta change policies, we gotta change practices, we gotta change implementations, and then those new ideologies, the way the pendulum swings in the other direction, and seldom is there ever any people looking. Why? Because this is also a very organic thing we're dealing with. We're not dealing with numbers, we're not dealing with statistics. I mean, even though we're talking about disproportionate representations of individuals, we're not sitting behind a desk and pushing papers. We're dealing with people. We're dealing with very real experiences, very unique experiences that's important to each and every person. And that's why it's important for us, for welfare services, to never judge any individual based on their particular their circumstances. So again, the short answer is we all have to come together. The answer is it does take a village, whatever that village is, but it does take that village to come together because not any one individual or one agency or one entity has all the answers to fix all problems.
I guess, yeah, I just want to piggyback on that because I think about, I go back to my Black Lives Matter, for example, right? It started with one incident. Mike Brown is dead in the road in Ferguson. It didn't start there, but you know what I mean, right? It jumped up. What came out of that through a lot of activism and advocacy and research is that there was something systemically broken in Ferguson, Missouri, between the police and the community, and their town government and the community. And I don't know how much you guys read about this, but the police department was basically operating like gangsters to raise money for Ferguson. And so they were stopping people. They'd pull you over for a broken taillight and give you 10 more tickets on top of it. Or you hadn't paid your tickets and your fines and they'd throw you in jail. And then they'd fine you for the fact that they had to feed you while you were in jail. It had become, quite honestly, a racket, right? And that was how the town was funding itself. Paying the police department, picking up the garbage. They were gangsters, right? In some kind of way. I'm going to go ahead and make political statements. So And the people have been living under these conditions, but didn't have the wherewithal or the knowledge or the understanding to know how to even be mad about it, or who was responsible for this happening. So I think in a lot of cases we have a difficult time sort of figuring out how all the systems are sort of working together to take opportunity away from people. And then what happens to people when opportunity has been taken away, right? They do, they get stressed out, they smack their kids around, they revert to crime, they use and abuse drugs. You know, we're seeing right now, for the first time in generations, that instead of people in the United States of America living longer, we're starting to see people living shorter lives. And it's happening to white communities, which usually it doesn't. But what's happening is drug abuse, guns, and car accidents, right, are suddenly for years, right? So we're, you know, people are living with cancer. People are living with HIV/AIDS, right? And, you know, and I'm old enough to know when I was your age and it was just emerging, it was a death sentence. And now people are living with it. We have miraculous things that we can do around health, and yet somehow, as a nation, we are not keeping people safe. And often from self-destructive behavior. So what's going on, right? These are big questions that your generation, I think, is going to be asked, really, to step in and to help solve and to help change things. And maybe you'll do it through your work, I guess, like we sort of do. Maybe you'll do it by creating a socially responsible business that says, wait a minute, you know, it's not enough for me to sell a product to these people. I want to do more in the community. I want to make a difference. I want to build up the community around me in a way that creates opportunity for lots of people. And so it's going to reach a point where we have to ask ourselves, both as individuals and as a community, what is the place that we want to live in? What do we want it to be like? Not just for me and mine, but for my neighbors as well. And then what am I going to do to help that community exist? And I think that's a question that we all should be asking. And I hope that everybody's asking it of themselves. I don't know that everybody is, but we can also start to make our political leaders more responsive to those kinds of questions by the way we vote. And we can make, you know, all kinds of systems, but we have to be aware of what's going on, and we have to pull on the levers of change and access to ensure that systems aren't created that take opportunity and advantage away from people.
And I just want to add one thing to that. Again, very light on the political statements, but in light of the strong influences that are out there for all of us on how to vote, what to do, whatever. Vote whatever way you want. I just want it to be known that in this day and age, and we've spoken to the fact that it's going to be your generation, and as well as maybe there's only 15 years difference between me and the age of some of the individuals in this room. It is a generational gap, and there's certain benchmarks I have to look at to say, okay, well, I know there are things that they're dealing with that I have no perspective on whatsoever from when I was born. But it has been said that, you know, you're all emerging adults. You know, to talk about cognitive development briefly, the human brain develops. The verdict's still out, but they say the human brain develops as late as the age of 20. So your brains aren't fully developed until, you know, your late 20s, early 30s. But this generation of young adults, emerging adults, adolescents have been documented as being more socially tolerant, more acceptant to their environment, to differences amongst one another. And why is that so important? And why am I so proud of that? Because it's going to be, I mean, right now, you know, minority population makes up about 30% of the total population of the United States. We're saying by the year 2050 that, you know, Caucasians will be a minority. No one should be worried about that. It's just I think it's the American fabric finally speaking to the fact that we're no longer going to be the conglomerate of people in the country. We're going to be the true melting pot. We're going to be more accepting of one another. And I challenge you guys to do a little social experiment when you get out of class today, whatever. But do some research on what I just said. Is your generation more tolerant than my generation was, than the generation of my parents or your parents before that? Think about all the social changes that have occurred since then. Think about, I think about, so I was born in 1977, so the heyday of my adolescent experience was in 1990s. Like, hip hop is at its high, that's another conversation. But I look back on what's on TV now, what's on TV during the 1990s, and you couldn't even imagine seeing a same-sex couple on TV without it being ridiculed, without it being some big political hot topic. Oh my God, the core values of the American population is going down the tubes. Now you look at TV, I mean, you have shows like Glee, you look at How to Get Away with Murder, and you have like the little subplots and some relationships there, and it's a lot more socially acceptable. And that is a function of the influence, the acceptance of the dominant generation that's here right now. There are certain things that work against us, and these are systemic things. Some things are deliberate. Some things I would like to hope and believe that most of the things that oppress individuals are present, but they're not deliberate. I think it's something that has come along based on, certain generations just kind of like letting things go. But, do a little experiment. Go and ask yourself, like, okay, are we that much more tolerant than, say, 10, 15 years ago? And I think you'd be surprised at the answer. I think we are. Again, the disclaimer is we have a long, long, long way to go, but we are on that path. And I'm not going to speak to everything being perfect. I need to stress that there are a lot of things that we do need to be worried about. But I think if we get hung up on being worried about so many things, we're going to forget about the successes or the tools or the clues that are being left behind for us to pick up the baton and hand it to our kids, and hand it to our classmate, or hand it to our colleague, or hand it to our friend, or hand it to a teacher or professor. So that's all I want to say about that.
Thank you very, very much.